So Lidia, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. It's wonderful to see you all.
So I don't know if any of you have had a chance to read the book yet, but it's definitely, I think there are some books that can teach us a lot. And really, it's kind of like a literary workout, I'd call this book. So it's really, has made me think about a lot of things, but I really want to leave it to you, Lidia, to tell us a little bit about the book and about yourself. So
Sure.
take it away.
Well, I was writing the book in the last few years, 4 years or so, and those were tricky times. I think at least some of you would agree. And I was thinking just so much about, how many people fall through the cracks in life. And some of it is, close to us, people we know and love, that kind of falling through the cracks. And some of it is more global, just stories and people that don't make the news wherever you live, or people whose lives don't match yours, so it doesn't get into your orbit. And I wanted it to be true that those could be beautiful, amazing characters and stories that people would care about. And so I just made a beeline for the kinds of people who fall through the cracks or live in the in-between spaces in life, or kind of fall out of the story. And as for me, I did this insane thing once in 2015.
Fill you with other bags. Oh, sorry.
I gave a TED Talk. And the reason that was an insane thing to do is I'm a hardcore card-carrying introvert. And so when I gave the TED Talk, I almost died.
Here, I'll share this. Let me pull it up so people can see it. It was a wonderful TED Talk, but I'll just share the screen so people can, and I'll put it in the chat. Here we are. The beauty of being a misfit.
There I am.
Yeah.
What you will not see if you go ever and look at that TED Talk is I had to follow John Legend.
Oh my gosh.
Which is why I almost died. It was the most beautiful experience in the history of the world, and then it was my turn. But why the TED Talk relates to this short story book is I am a person who has felt like they didn't quite fit, or I've lived my life slightly to the side of mainstream, or I got spit out more than your average Joe in my experiences in life. I've been homeless, I've been fired, I've been incarcerated, I've been in rehab. So my life has had a little bit of a similar, plug-in to some of the characters in Verge.
And you spoke about its importance, the beauty and also importance of being a misfit and of that moment, and of the opportunity it has. Can you?
Right. The TED Talk and some of the stories in this book are about how even at the moment when we blow it, when we make some terrible mistake, or we make a bad choice, or we do the wrong thing, even in those moments where we're falling apart or blowing it, we're also beautiful and there's still light on us. And usually we learn the most from mistakes. When we go along and do everything right, we just feel kind of sassy, like we're in our mojo. But when we make mistakes or fall off or fall down, those are the opportunities where we change and we make discoveries and choices. And so I wanted to get into that moment and say, there could be beauty there too. There could be change and hope and beauty there too.
So there are a couple of things I think I spoke about in my email. I mean, specifically in your TED Talk, you speak about yourself and how you were being hailed in the literary world and celebrated, and that you didn't allow yourself to take it in, right?
Right. So you don't have to agree with me, but I'm just going to say something that feels true to me in my life, which is Sometimes people who've come from rough beginnings, from trauma or abuse, as was the case for me and my family, we never learn how to grab goodness or hope or ambition, even when something comes right in front of us as an opportunity that's glorious. We could miss it because nobody ever showed us how to look up and jump and reach and grab it. So some of us don't even know how to do that. And
Yeah,
I
that
wanted
was
to tell stories about people who like have to learn how to reach and grab it. And
yeah.
there's even a moment in the TED Talk and in the story where I talk about, instead of being able to say, yes, I want this, give it to me, when I was offered a book contract, I felt like I had a small stone in my throat. I couldn't say it.
Mm.
And I've been wearing this stone necklace ever since. I've been wearing this stone necklace for 30 years.
Mm.
And my husband and my son have the same necklace. It's sort of how we keep our stuff together.
Is it to externalize it or to remind you that it's all right to have the lump in the throat?
Exactly. It's to
Yeah.
make it something beautiful.
um, yes, the what you said in the TED Talk, I mean, it reminded me. It reminded me of a couple of things. What you talk about you had a interview in the Paris Review, and you say that we are all walking around carrying our experience we have ever had written on our bodies, and that reminded me of the ACE score that is now given to children. There's a quiz where you can, and I think that many of you read about this in Hillbilly Elegy, where there you can assess how prone you are to inflammatory diseases or diabetes and various diseases because of the stress that you have experienced early in your life, such as childhood trauma. There you go, adverse childhood experience. Lori, I know Lori is I believe studying social work, and I know we have a couple other social workers in the audience, so they know exactly what I'm talking about and probably could speak about it better than I could. So if you want to chime in, um, please do so. But what you said, it made total sense, because if you think about childhood neglect, having addiction in the family, childhood abuse, what those children are never taught, and I can speak from my own experience as well, that no one is asking you how you feel. So every one of those feelings and experience, is buried deep in your body. And so what books like the deepest well and the body keeps the score are saying is, and what you're saying is they become manifest inside your body. So they write about it as science. So when you, in the TED Talk, when you speak about people from trauma and abuse and difficult circumstances needing to learn to want, it makes complete sense, right? Because that is kind of the unwritten message or untold message of what neglect or abuse says to you.
Sometimes it's a swallowed up thing or a hidden thing or a buried thing. And I teach, in addition to academia, I teach in incarceration facilities and rehab centers and places where people have little access to art and creative writing. And it's partly where I learned for the social worker people, or just those interested anywhere on this topic. I feel like we're all carrying everything that's ever happened to us in our actual bodies. And so the neck ache you get, or the backache you've had for 20 years, or the eye twitch you get when you're nervous, or this throat thing I have that I made into a necklace, we internalize and carry the experiences. And only some things in your life encourage you to express it and tell it and let it out. But if nothing ever comes in front of you that encourages you to express it, you just keep holding it. And a lot of the people I work with are so wrapped up. I'm a really physical person, so here's the gesture for so wrapped up that they
Yeah.
can barely breathe or speak, and they just start crying if I ask them some questions about expressing their experience. So this is how I got into, I guess it's sort of a form of narrative medicine or art therapy, to help people tell their stories on a piece of paper to move toward self-expression or moving it to the outside, rather than continuing to let it be destructive from swallowing too much of it, bearing too much of it on the inside. And a lot of the characters in Verge are kind of right on that threshold between expression or destruction and, you know, trying to make the leap.
Yes. So tell us, that brings us to Verge in these stories. So how would you link it to your TED Talk and what you were saying?
Well, the title is a big deal.
Yes. Oh, it comes up. I mean, what people are on the verge of and what body means, right? I mean, what the definition of the line is, right? Whether it's your physical body or society or a stage of life or.
That's right. So there are characters who are in a place where they're on the verge of something, like a girl who grows up next to a prison being built. And there are characters who are on the verge of a big, dumb choice they're about to make, like some women in marriages that went badly and are, you know, losing it. They're at the moment right before they do either a good thing or a bad thing. There are characters from other countries who are in refugee situations or trying to make a journey from a war-torn place to safety. So that's the verge they're on. There's emotional verge, physical verge, even the verge of imagination or sanity. So that title just pretty much covers everything. Every story in the book is some form of on the verge of.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to get into, and I want to make sure to cover it. So do you see yourself in any of these characters?
Well, weirdly, I feel like there's a particle of me and my life in all of them. But, you know, for fiction writers, that's just the seed or the little piece that the story blooms out from. So in another way, I'm not any of them. So I am a particle, but they go far beyond my experience. I will say this, though, every character in the book is secretly an homage to someone I know. But I have not used their actual biographies. I've just used the feeling and relationship I have with them to sort of jump off into a story. But no one would ever know that except I'm telling you. So tell no one.
Or it's like highly abstracted, right? I mean, there's some tough material in here, but maybe it's not supposed to be taken literally. Maybe it's, I mean, there's so many metaphors on so many levels that it does make you, right? I mean, you're constantly thinking about what the verge is, what's at stake, as you ask, you know, in the Paris Review article, what's at stake in their lives.
Well, like the first story, the very first story is about a refugee girl who's trying to make a choice. I'll leave it at that. And she's a swimmer. And I was a competitive swimmer for 25 years.
I wanted to ask you about that. Okay.
So there's a crossing there, but it's not literal. It's figurative, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And so my life goes in and out of the stories, but then not really. And I had a lifelong obsession with Jane Goodall. She appears in one of the stories, as everyone should.
Yeah, the first story, I mean, I guess you don't want to say like what the circumstance is, but it does come down to kind of a choice that the girl has, right? She feels two tugs, and it's that moment where you have to fight or you surrender, right? And that's what I kind of tried to tell people in the introduction to our newsletter was, I think everybody has had a moment like that, right?
Sure.
Where they're faced with that choice. Yeah.
Yeah. Many of the stories, yes.
And was it a moment of transformation for them? Yeah. Which it often is. I mean, yes, The Beauty of Being a Misfit. Okay, is the title of her TED Talk. I put the link in the chat. I did. It's right up above my first thing in the chat.
If you ever watch it, though, you have to picture John Legend singing. And you know what he's saying? He sang Redemption Song. So everybody is just like on the floor with how beautiful.
But you know what? after the talk, you still get a standing ovation. So don't say, I mean, that was not leftover John Legend goodness. That was you,
But
and
that
that's also
almost killed me too, because I'm not good at receiving. So
right. Yeah.
it was just
Um,
never again. That's all I have to say about it.
but that's also, you could tell from the TED audiences they are supportive of your bravery. I mean, if you're up there talking, they understand what it
They were
takes,
very
right?
kind.
And they are championing you because you're up there. Yeah.
Yeah, they were
Um,
wonderful.
and because of what you're giving to them through your talk. So all of the stories in Verge bring the body into close-up range, sometimes in difficult ways, as when the woman brings her cheek to a radiator, or like the girl who's an organ runner, or the girl who moves her body from the safety of domesticity to the danger of a prison, and sometimes in tender ways, as when Jackson drives his grief into the ocean, or when two girls at the end of the book are holding hands and singing and dancing, or the girl who tries to pull a raft to safety by tying a rope to her ankle. What do these stories have to say about bodies, arms, legs, eyes, ankles? These close-ups are meant in part to counter definitions of beauty, or in fact, several times you use the word terrible or horrible to describe beauty. So
I
any of that,
definitely
all of
have
that.
some kind of issue, don't I?
Well,
Um, I do. No, it's very important to me. I mean, so there's a kind of feminist answer I could give right now, but I think the deeper answer for me started in my family. My mother was born with one leg 6 inches shorter than the other. And
mm,
I grew up with that, her disability being very close to my body and my face and my life and my understanding of beauty.
mm,
And my best friend was missing an arm, and he was a swimmer.
mm.
And so
Oh,
I
wow.
had these really early relationships and images of what was beautiful or amazing, and it didn't fit my culture's definitions on TV or in the movies or whatever magazines
Mm,
of beauty. So
mm.
from the start, I was weird. And experiencing things slightly differently around what is beautiful, what is strong, what is successful. So I think my attention to bodies away from what we're told they should be comes from those early differences in embodiment. And so I'm forever writing characters with those bodies. And so the more feminist answer is, I'm just still pissed off about the beauty myth in American culture, and I'm never going to get over it, and I'm going to resist it my entire life.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
that's just true.
yeah, yeah. Um, right. And the whole aging and how that feeds into it, the beauty myth,
Yeah, and
just, yeah.
I think too, being a swimmer for so long, in the
Mm,
water I'm weightless, and nobody cares if I have makeup on or if I'm
mm,
pretty. In the
mm,
water, I can be this other creature. And I think I wish we could come up with new definitions for beauty and strength in this
mm,
culture. And by doing that, different definitions of bodies, embodiment, like not how to lose weight and be svelte, but what is the miracle of hands or fingers, or what is the miracle of breasts, or what is, what are bodies outside of the stories we've been told,
mm,
is a fast way to put it.
mm. Cindy is asking, what about the prosthetic eye experience?
So I have a friend who lost his eye in a car accident, and I've known him a very long time. And after the accident, he, in his real life, retreated from society and just went and lived in a cabin by himself in the woods for the rest of his life. He's still there with his dog.
Mm,
And when we very much love each other. And when I talked to him about storytelling, he said, I asked him, well, what do you think people don't understand about your experience? And he said that I lost my pronoun eye more than I lost my
mm,
ocular eye. And I wish you would tell a story about that, how the eye could dissolve. And I said, is that sad? And he said, no, it's beautiful. And so if you happen to read that story, something that happens in that story is about the pronoun I kind of dissolving, and that maybe being beautiful, or my attempt.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's fantastic. Yeah, so there are some explicit scenes in the book. Like I want to, make that clear to people, and there are some like difficult circumstances and, so, but clearly in general, I'd like to kind of address this idea that if it's not like a pleasurable, enjoyable, transporting experience, that it's not worthwhile. That things that are difficult to look at and read about are worthwhile. I mean, I found a lot of things like difficult to read about, but I've gotten so much out of reading your interview and reading the book and the TED Talk. I mean, it's made me think about a lot of things. So I feel both ways, but clearly you have it feels like it's part of your intention to do that. Is that kind of wanting us to look?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have one thing I could tattoo on my forehead the rest of my life, it would be difficulty carries beauty too.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I have a hard time with art and books and movies that just have one bandwidth of feel good.
Right.
I have a hard time with those. Those are, they make me agitated. And so for what it's worth, what I have to add to storytelling, which is a giant ocean and I'm one little tributary, but what I have to add is that there is beauty in the difficult moment as well. There is transcendence, there is rich depth of experience inside the difficult moment as well. And I learned that from a sad thing in my life that I'm going to say out loud right now, which is I had a daughter who died the day she was born. And that experience brought me to, I'm going to use that word, threshold again. It brought me to this place of intense joy and intense pain crossing, or, happening at the same time. And I am positive it changed me forever. And I became a writer after that experience. So it birthed in me an art form that has been my life.
Yeah.
Even though it came from an extremely deeply sad place.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was basically in a way, a life or death experience, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it was, right. And so you found, but some of the characters in the book, I mean, they don't always find that moment of transcendence or transformation, right? I mean, right? Sometimes it's, yeah.
Especially the married women exiting marriages. I've been married 3 times. So there are these little fragment stories all through the book of these women who are kind of on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And really, they're just dealing with having been married. So some of you will think that's funny, others not. But yeah, these women who come in and out of the whole book, they may transcend their circumstances, they may not. I have found that to be true in my life.
Right. I mean, obviously, right. But either way, there's something for the reader to take away, even if the characters don't. Right.
Right. In those cases, with those women who are on the verge in the book and some other characters, I'm trying to touch something which is about all of us, which is everyone at some point in their life does a couple of things that are out of character. Like you just sort of slip and you do something that shocks even you, or you make a terrible mistake or a weird choice. And I'm interested in those out of character moments. Like, what do they show us about ourselves and each other? And I don't have some profound answer about that. I'm just interested in that space. So I put some of the characters in it.
Yeah. Or things that happen to us that are so out of character. I mean, what you describe about your daughter, I mean, that happens to millions of women.
Yes.
And yet it's still so, it's almost impossible to talk about, or miscarriages, how difficult that is to talk about.
Yes.
Or even menopause. I mean, I will say,
don't get me started.
Right. So I will say, started having hot flashes. And I told one of my friends who's a man, and he said, "Wow, how long has this been going? This sounds like an opportunity. You know, maybe people should write about this." And you're just like, "This has been going on for millions of years, you know." But I mean, we don't talk about it. We so many things we don't talk about aging.
Right, right.
But all the same,
It's
yeah,
not just true for women, it's true for people, but for women in particular, there's pieces of our lives that slip the storylines.
yeah,
They
yeah.
just slip out. And it's partly my job in life to go back and get them. And don't worry, I have a whole drawer full of half a book, and the title is just called M.
M.
So I'm working on the menopause because I
Ah,
feel as if
I see.
something terrible has happened and nobody told us, they didn't give us a correct guidebook. I'm very upset.
I know, right? Well,
Yeah,
there's so much. I mean,
very
parenthood, you
upset,
know,
but I'm
as if we
working
got,
on it.
yeah, as if we got a guidebook about parenthood. And I'm not a parent, but I can say, you know, what an extraordinarily difficult job that we're all expected, you know, to take part in. Um, but then this same friend did send me an email showing me that there's like $1 billion of VC funding going into menopause now. So that's exciting. It sounds like they did just stumble upon it. So that's good. This is good. This is good. We've got people on it now. Um, so Jenny says, Two Girls is such a transcendent, joyful note to end the book on. Could you talk a little bit about that particular short? Working with abused and trafficked youth, it gives me such hope. Jenny, I would love to hear more about what you do. If you can chat us while Lidia is answering, that'd be wonderful.
That story is at the end for a reason, and you just articulated the reason. If there's a place where there's nothing but hope, it's that last story. And it's a kind of reminder to all of us that um, that hope is so tiny. Sometimes it could be a retinal flash or a single moment, that it doesn't always come from looking up, that it could be down where worms and beetles are in the dirt,
Mm,
that it could just happen in a part that slips the story because we're looking at the heroic action. And this moment I shared with a girlfriend of mine when I was younger, you know, stayed in my head for life. And then kind of recently, about 4 years ago, I saw these two girls on the beach near my house in Portland, the West Coast. I saw them swinging,
mm,
and I thought, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And because the book has some difficult characters and storytelling in it, I wanted to land in a redefinition of beauty, from Lydia land. What beauty is to me, it's those
mm.
girls.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the moments and the language got shorter and shorter towards the end, right? You kind of, the endings came more abruptly, and then there was that moment, and that language, I don't know if you'll agree with me, Jenny. I mean, it reminded me a little bit of James Joyce and the ending of Ulysses, of it just the language being like taking shapes and reflecting what the girls were doing.
I love that you
Yeah.
said that, Pauline. Thank you for noticing that. I have this idea that for these ideas we're talking about to change, or for definitions of beauty and hope to change, language would have to move around a little bit. So
Mm,
when I go poetic, that's what I'm up to. I'm trying to suggest we have to move the language, not just ideas,
mm.
which poets know.
Um,
Poets have known that forever.
yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of the stories that kind of read like poetry. I mean, they're densely packed. Yeah, in terms of language. Gloria says, I've had a number of moments of extreme joy and extreme pain converge in my life. I can
Right.
identify.
Right. I mean, the second any of us start talking about it, a few people start going like this, because I
Right.
didn't make that up. It's just true. It's just not all writers go there for storytelling. I wish
Mm,
more writers would.
yeah. And Jenny says, it's a sublime, beautiful moment. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's kind
So,
of you.
and so I mean, given what we, I mean, I what it you were talking about, I wanted to ask you about a passage in Cusp, which is from The Tempest, which is this thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine.
I think we're
Can
in
you
a
talk about?
cultural moment that line corresponds to, in that we do a lot of pointing at other people, like to blame
Mm,
or cast the problem on anyone but ourselves. And at a certain point, we have to ask, as part of the conversation, in what ways have we been complicit? In what ways have we helped create the troubling thing in front of us that we like to point to and say is not us? And, you know, Shakespeare's a lot of things, but occasionally he seems to get a line or two right.
occasionally, yeah, every once in a while. Um, and that you also say in Streetwalker, I live on this street in this life, always in fear of the body rejecting me, and that speaks to, you know, the various meanings of what you mean as a writer by body,
Yeah,
right?
and that many of us, in some ways, maybe it's all of us, have lived double lives, triple lives, quadruple lives. I mean, I was a troubled youth, and I spoke a second ago about how I experienced homelessness and incarceration and some of the bad things in life. And then later I have a PhD. And later I become a teacher for 30 years of people in college. And those two things don't quite align. So in Cusp and in, you know, the Streetwalker story too,
Right.
there's this doubleness, this like, I'm not that and I am that at the same time. And how do we live with both of those stories in our bodies? What does it mean that we carry more than one story in our bodies?
Well, I also interpreted the body to mean society in
Yes.
that sentence. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, because she kind of felt like on the edge, but not quite. And that's how her neighbors treated her
Yes.
in a way.
And
Yeah.
I think our cultural moment, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one walking around feeling like we're walking this weird little edge right now where things could topple over or things could kind of find new forms again. And maybe it's going to be okay, but who knows? Because there are, you
Yeah.
know, tricky things happening all at once.
Yeah. Um, but in terms of like people feeling accepted, right, by society around them, just in terms of like groups of friends or groups of people, it's not that difficult for people to understand. I mean, I certainly understand it, you know, of feeling on the outside. And in fact, also in the book, you very rarely use like direct dialogue. You relay conversations, right? But it's kind of at a distance, and it makes it contributes to that feeling of remove of these characters.
Yeah, that's maybe I'm just really bad at traditional dialogue. It's not true. It's in all my novels, but I do have a little bit of an alienated relationship to traditional dialogue. For one thing, I told you I'm an introvert, so there's that. But I don't trust traditional dialogue because I don't know anyone who talks that way. So when I come into relationship with dialogue, I'm thinking about how we move around each other as people and what we say and
Mm.
what we don't say. And it rarely fits what you would call traditional dialogue, how we really are with each other. And so that interests me, how language comes in and out.
Yeah, because the two. I think there are two stories where you use the first person, where you, and it's in those stories I think that the dialogue that there's direct dialogue. So maybe this is what I mean by a literary workout, right? I mean, you're talking about titles and symbolism and metaphors. So I'm just trying to relay that there's a lot to think about. So Sue is asking, is there any story in the book you were hesitant to put out there, maybe because it was too close or too real?
No. So
No. Yes.
the only because it's life that's too close or too real for me.
Mm,
Storytelling gives you a form and a once removedness and an art and a figurative options like symbol and image storytelling gives you a place where you can put the too real or the too intense or the too big or the too difficult. You know, your favorite poems are often about an experience that's ginormous, but it's in the shape of a tiny poem this big. That act of distillation is what storytelling affords me. It's life I can barely handle. I'm really frightened person. I'm scared every day of my life. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to leave the house. All kind of fears. But the page and the canvas and the piece of paper hold me together. And so you see what I mean? Storytelling is the ability to live and to thrive and to express that I actually can't feel in my regular walk around life. So I'm pushing past the fear. Well, my whole life I've tried different things. Martinis worked for a while.
Yeah, a lot of these characters have a very close relationship with alcohol.
They do. That has been part of my life. I've on and off myself been on medications, as so many of my friends, therapy, swimming, meditation, you know. But the thing that helped the most in terms of fear, and I've tried to put this in some of the stories, is changing my relationship to fear. In other words, I imagined fear as a person that I was going to sit down with, and that helped me figure out how to orient differently to her. And now she's my friend. I still have fear, but I can sit down and have a beer with fear in a way that I could not before.
Right. So it's part of you that by externalizing it, maybe giving it a face, you're able to like accept it, you know? Yeah.
Yes.
That's what we're taught, is to accept it. And that's the way to incorporate it into ourselves and move forward.
Right.
Yeah. So Lori says, I'm so intrigued by what motivates you in your writing, your experiences, and commitment into relaying these difficult stories. Do you make yourself available to book clubs via Zoom?
Yes, I do. Zoom has become life right now.
It's true.
Yes,
It's
I
true.
do. I do Zoomy book clubs and workshops and webinars. I run a writing center here in Portland, so I try to make myself available as much as possible for people who also have difficulty connecting or getting access to art and discussions of art and making art. I'm motivated in my own writing by this threshold happening to me personally, the desire to keep everything that's ever hurt me secret coming this direction and never tell it and hold on to it my whole life, meeting the desire to tell in the hopes that even one other person would feel less alone. And the day those two things crashed into each other, I became a writer. And it's still the reason I'm writing, except for that M book that has its own set of reasons that I'm writing. But anyway, that moment happened in me in an earth-shattering way, and so that's why I keep going. Because even if I turn around and there's one girl who's the 15-year-old who feels less wrong and alone, or one man who's the 52-year-old who feels less like a failure, it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So does that answer Linda's question of, are you able to share fear of what? No, not really.
My fear, you know, you mean what's my fear? Like everything.
Yeah.
I am a terribly afraid person, which is really weird because I don't come off that way. I know.
Well, you're
Present
described
that
as a
way.
fearless writer. I mean, that's really the adjective that's used to describe you. So yeah, it's amazing contrast.
Well, you know, I mean, this is the sad part. I was raised by an abusive, tyrannical father. And so I've had that weight upon my body and my life as, you know, your entrance into the world. And
It's your
so,
hardwired into you. It's your
yeah,
template. Yeah.
hardwired. Mhm.
Right. So it's very difficult to shake that. Right. Get a new template.
Mm-hmm. Or story.
Um,
Like
or
stories
story.
let you de-story what came before and restory something else. That's such a beautiful, liberating, amazing thing about storytelling is no story has to be the same thing twice. Like, you can compost what was difficult or harmful and remake it, reconstitute it as an entirely different story, and then you can learn to live the different stories, even though it's hard.
She says, thank you for being brave to write it out. So,
that's kind of you. I don't know if it's brave. I do know if I don't write now, I become my worst self. And that's just, you don't want to see that. It's ugly.
I mean, I can't believe that there are people who think, well, in a way I can, so I'll just ask this question. You say all of the stories in Verge are based either on real people I have known or loved, or people in the world I read about and found affinity or intimacy with. Each story is a bit of an homage. One interesting reaction that you received at readings was a disbelief in the existence of characters like the girl in The Organ Runner, or in second language. What do you think about that contention? I mean, I guess I can, the only story that I would say this, I would agree with this about is The Sisters. Like, I feel like that is maybe just purely symbolic, or, maybe you can speak about that separately or whatever, but why do you think people have this contention that these people don't exist?
I think everybody has a sort of bubble around what they know and love and believe or have heard about. And those bubbles are different from each other. And sometimes our bubbles touch each other and other times they don't. But, when I taught at a community college, I had a student who was an organ runner in Russia when she was quite young.
Wow.
And the story I wrote is nothing like her life, actually. It's highly stylized and made abstract. But this girl existed, and she was at a community college to try and change her life. And when I would tell, I'd go to lady luncheons or academic conference things, and I'd talk about this girl, and they'd say no. And I'd be like, what is happening that people don't believe, people in desperate troubled lives don't exist? What are we doing that we're going like, so I have a devotion to pulling those kinds of storylines and lives onto the page to remind us that it's probably in your neighborhood.
Sadly, it's true, right? I mean,
next to your face.
That's in the newspapers, right? I mean, People Magazine, right? I mean, it's not like, but I mean, the reason you said they're selected because they're so agile and getting in and around spaces, it reminded me, I drove across the border from Spain to Morocco, and at the Moroccan border, the packages were passed to kids because they would let the kids run across the border. They couldn't catch them. So that's what the mothers would do. It just makes perfect sense.
Their whole universes lived in a series of strata underneath whatever we consider our lives to be. And I mean, in terms of the plant and animal world too.
Yeah.
The lives of worms. My God. Somebody be a fellow nerd with me. It's amazing. And my interest isn't in exploiting or sensationalizing those stories, which you might see in a glossy magazine somewhere in the grocery store line. My interest is in claiming narrative weight and importance to those bodies and those lives and those existences and those stories, as important as Joyce, as important as Hemingway. That's my interest.
And it also reminded me of another thing, which is a friend of mine I went to college with. He was incredibly cynical. I mean, one of the most cynical people, but he could be an incredibly good friend. But we had this conversation, or it came up in conversation, about girls being held prisoner in a man's home, like in Ohio or something.
Right.
And he said, no, I can't believe that exists. And it wasn't because to me, it wasn't because he didn't believe it. It was because it would break him to know that that was true.
I think you're onto something
like
there.
That soft, that's part of him that was like a really good, there was a good person buried in all that cynicism, but it literally would break that part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I so hear that. I work on a Portland task force that helps get girls out of sex trafficking and into college. But I think I was just marked for life the very first time I read Ursula K. Le Guin's story, Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is a very famous story about an ideal little kingdom society that has something rotten in the basement, is a fast way to say it. And you're onto something there. I think sometimes people do know it, but they don't want to look at it. And I guess I'm partly in the world to say, not only can we bear looking at it if other people can bear living it, but I can show you, if you hold my hand, there is beauty and astonishing wonder there too. And that's the reason to look, not to go, that's terrible, but to go find the beauty of it.
Yeah, like on the cover with the wolf. I mean,
yeah, it's such a great cover. I didn't make the cover, but I was very tickled by it. It's a like rainbow with scary wolf.
Yeah, in one of the layers of the rainbows.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's really good. Sue asks, who are some authors that you admire?
Oh, I very much admire Therese Myatt, who's a First Nations writer who wrote the book Heartberries. Here, I can type, you want me to type it in there?
Heartberries was the last couple of years, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
And oh God, there's so many books flying in my head right now. There's a movie that I love quite a bit called The Handmaiden, that I've just watched 3 times in a row, just trying to figure it out. And it's, I'll give you a warning, it's R rated, but the layering of narratives and the twists and storylines and the non-American cultural storytelling of it is just gorgeous. But Teresa's book, I've just been reading over and over. I love it so much. And Melissa Febos has a brand new book coming out. I'll put her in there too, called, I think it's called Girlhood. Maybe somebody can look it up. It's literally coming out this next month. Unless it's called Daughter. I'm kidding. It's something like that. But if you look Melissa up, you'll find it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's 2 right out of the chute that, I would read them any day, all day long.
So what is next for you? Do you know?
I'm finishing a novel right now, which is spinning me around and around and around in circles. And I have a new nonfiction book that's an anti-memoir. I have an anti-memoir called The Chronology of Water. And this is a second anti-memoir. It will be called Resuscitations. So I'm always working fiction and nonfiction at the same time.
Wow. Describe what you mean by anti-memoir.
It breaks all the supposed rules of memoir writing, just like I did the first time around. So if there were a list of 20 magical memoir writer rules, I just ticked them off, broke every one I could find, both in terms of form and content. An example would be how in a memoir, you're supposed to maintain a unified voice so that you'll have narrative authority. That was just a deep pleasure to break apart and abandon.
Interesting. Jenny says the chronology of water is amazing, and she's excited for Resuscitation.
Thank you so much. Chronology of Water is being adapted for film by Kristen Stewart, so that ought to be fun.
Oh, wow. That's great.
It's mesmerizing and terrifying to me.
So she's producing it and
she's
starring in it?
She's directing it.
She's directing it.
and she worked partly on the screenplay.
Okay. Is
I
it being
have no
shot now?
idea
I feel
how
like I
it's
saw a photo.
What?
Okay. Okay, right. I thought I saw a picture of her directing something right now, but that may not have been her. Well, I mean, at this point, you know, Hollywood is basically frozen in amber, just waiting for the virus to end. So, but the fact that she's attached to it, I mean, I worked at William Morris the beginning many years ago, and so the fact that she's attached is a really good sign, right? I mean, it's
Oh yeah, and
yeah.
she and my husband worked on the screenplay for 3 years now, and she had a little
Oh,
camper
wow.
in front of my house for a while, and that was a big neighborhood story.
I bet. Wow. So, I mean, it sounds that's a lot to write at the same time, but if it somehow balances and feeds you, then it's. I mean, I think for some it would be like hard to maintain that balance. You
I
know,
understand
in
that. I'm just on
in
the
your head.
opposite end of that spectrum. If I'm not writing, I go literally berserk, and it's just
Mm.
not good. I get into all kind of trouble. You just have to trust me.
Uh, all right. So, if anyone has any other questions, I want to encourage you to ask them or any other comments. And Cynthia
I'm
says,
working
please,
on the M book.
yeah, please finish and publish your M book soon. Yes,
I
I agree.
know it's a wasteland out there.
Can I make a comment, Pauline? It's just a lot
Yeah,
to write
please.
at. I just wanted to go back to the beginning, Lydia, when you talked about the purpose of narrative, you know, therapy and art therapies and all that, and that whole analogy that you made with the whole beauty and the, you know, going together and that visual. I really wanted to just out loud say how I appreciate that, because as a clinical social worker, a lot of times the trauma cannot be expressed, right? It's too painful, like you so eloquently said. It's too painful to talk about, or you just can't do it in traditional formats. And so the art and writing and storytelling brings it out little by little in a different way. And even though others and the larger population may not appreciate the difficulty that you share, right? The raw reality that happens to our neighbors, to the people at church, to the people in the grocery store, to our family members that you're putting out there, there's definitely an audience that is going to feel so much more supported and hopefully, you know, touched and you know, attracted to healing that way. So I just wanted to thank you for doing that, because there's definitely an audience that needs that. And
Thank you for saying
nice
that.
to hear that. It's special, very special. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Laurie. That's wonderful.
There's a kid I worked with 2 years ago who he could come to college sometimes, but mostly he had to stay in a juvie center. But he hit people all the time. They couldn't get him to stop hitting people everywhere he went. And he came to a center I work at, and two things brought him closer to being able to start talking. One is there's a heavy bag in the center and he could hit it. And the other is there was a giant blank canvas, like 5 foot by 5 foot, and paint. And he went at that thing. And I witnessed this beautiful moment of expression and just being able to release energy. And he's going to graduate from college this year.
Wow.
But nobody had asked him, or nobody had given him a place to put it, to release it. That wasn't just behave well or we punish you. Anyway, I'm with you. I wish we could go have coffee and talk about this. I love that. That was really eloquent.
Sadly, I'm on the opposite end of the, you know, country.
Damn it.
So it's gonna have to be a Zoom meeting.
That's right. That's the beauty of Zoom. Oh, Lori, I'm so glad that you spoke. And Joanne says, you're such a pleasure, and this was a great visit with you.
Now
So,
you're gonna make me shy.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm so glad that that people have read your work and were able to comment on it, because I think this has been a really great conversation
Such a
and an
pleasure.
important one. Yeah. So I'm very happy about that. So You have said that 5 people can win copies of the book, right?
Yep.
For this chat?
Yep.
Okay, that's wonderful. So you don't have to stay on, but I can select them and I'll send you the names and addresses. So
Okay.
okay. All right. So thank you so much
so
for joining us, Lydia. It was so great. All right. And I will switch to gallery view now. And oh, thank you for the applause. Oh, look at the applause, Lydia. Great. That's nice.
Thank you.
Oh, that's so great. So I will select 5 winners. So if you'd like to win a book, raise your hand, say hi, so I can make it easy for myself. Oh, yay, Diane. Okay, so Diane Markman, will you please put your, email me, Pauline@bookmovement.com. Your, okay, Chris C. Where's Chris C? Okay, Chris C, great. Chat makes it easier. Wait, I'm going to write these down in case you guys don't email me back. All right. Wait a second. Louise Craft. Okay. I think we're at 4 now. Wait, 2.
She call you?
Wait a second. Okay, now hold on. All right, so we have 3. And Cheryl DeRosa. I think we're at 5. I think, yeah?
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yes, Chrissy. Okay.
Mute myself.
Chrissy, and then whoever. All right, so, and Louise, you'll email me. Oh, sorry, no. You're one of the winners, but you weren't the first one.
No, I was
Denise.
4.
Okay, Denise. Right, I gotcha. So it's Christy, Denise Rodolini, Louise Kraft, Sue, I'm going to not pronounce your name correctly, Fager, and Cheryl DeRose. You are the winners. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
this is going to be posted on Facebook, so it can be archived. And thank you for such a wonderful conversation, everybody. And thank you.
I wish you best wishes to you.
Oh,
It was
Harriet
great.
said, wishing you best wishes. So, thanks.
Thank you so much.
On a continued
wishes,
good
Lydia.
career and a good path.
Thank
Many
you
more
so
books.
much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you. It was
Thank
very
you.
enjoyable.
Oh,
Very
great.
enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.